guys? Welcome back to the Jenks Island podcast, the only podcast where you can get your takes from a washed-up Division III corner and his friends. I'm Tom McGee, today's host, joined by my good friend and co-host STERB. And in today's episode, we'll be discussing the offensive line class for the 2026 NFL Draft. It's time to get into draft season, start our week-over-week breakdowns of each position. So in today's episode, we'll start with the offensive tackles and then work our way into the interior offensive line. So getting right into it, I will list our consensus top 5 for the offensive tackles, and then Serb and I will start to get into, a bit of a more in-depth breakdown of some of these different guys. So starting at number 5, we had Caleb Lomu out of Utah. At number 4, we had Blake Miller out of Clemson. At number 3, we had Monroe Freeling out of Georgia. At number 2, we had Spencer Fano out of Utah. And at number 1, we had Francis Mauigoa out of Miami. Sturb, I'll let you first start to break down some of the honorable mentions that you had on your list that quite didn't crack our consensus top 5, but are obviously some of the bigger, offensive tackle prospects in this upcoming draft.
Yeah, so I'll hop right in with Max Ianacor out of Arizona State. I think he was number 6 for both me and Jenks. At tackle, it was a bit up and down for him this past season. He's like really good at absorbing contact, and he's hard to move off of his spot initially. But once the play kind of breaks down, you can kind of get pushed around a bit. It seems that his lower half is like he's missing a bit of sand in his pants, and he's he's very good at wrestling with his upper half, but he can get kind of decleated and out leveraged as the play goes on. So I have like an early 4th grade on him, probably just on the fringe of day 2. Consensus Sports, this guy's hanging probably around like 80-ish. And then another guy that just missed out on my list is Isaiah World. He's really like a super project-y guy. I think he played at Nevada before Oregon, and some of the Nevada tape is pretty not great. But if you're betting on this guy, like I believe he's under 22. He's over 6'5", he's 320 and 34.5-inch arms. He's someone to me that stands out, and if he gets coached up at the NFL level, he could turn out being like a very, very high upside pick if he's kind of developed. But he's not going to be for everyone, and he's not going to be for situations where they need like an instant contributor in day 1. So yeah, those are a couple guys that like just missed out on my list.
Yeah, I'll add this about Isaiah World, right? Obviously, Oregon saw the talent there, taking a guy from a smaller school that wasn't a perfect prospect at all. So definitely a developmental piece at the NFL level. But moving on, one other honorable mention that was not on this list, and maybe some people are shocked that was not on this list, was Kadyn Proctor. I think, kind of consensus when you look around at some of the bigger guys, they see Kadyn Proctor as maybe a top 5 offensive tackle. I think, coming out of high school, he was obviously a huge recruit for Alabama who ended up flipping to Iowa and then back to Bama. And there was kind of all that, issues around his commitment. And his freshman year, he kind of struggled. But the last 2 years, he's really taken a step up and allowed a lot less sacks. Went from 13 in his freshman season all the way to 1 this past season 2 years later. Big guy, big physical tackle at 6'7", 366. I think at the next level, he definitely needs to lose some weight. He kind of, Deion Dawkins is a 6'5", about 320, and he's considered a pretty big offensive tackle. So, I think that his, size and his physicality definitely, bodes well for him in the run game, because when he gets moving, right, he's a pretty quick guy, but and he can just absolutely maul people in the run game. But in the pass game, right, I think, because he's such a big guy, he can't bend as well, and he sets too high, and guys, can get up underneath him, or he doesn't quite have the lateral quickness to recover off of speed moves or counters. So I think that, I imagine that his 5'10", 5 is probably going to be pretty slow at the combine too, just by, looking at kind of that lateral quickness and the inability to match counter. So I think that he definitely needs to lose some weight. I think, he's kind of a developmental prospect for me too, because I think that, he has all of the raw traits, and he's obviously a huge guy and very physical, and you can't teach physicality. You can't teach being a mauler. But, I think the losing the weight, it's easier said than done, but I think it needs to happen. And he kind of reminds me of his old teammate, Tyler Booker, too, who's obviously a huge dude and was an absolute mauler in the pass game, wasn't the best run blocker, obviously went pretty high, but I think at guard, it's a little bit different than tackle. So, Kadyn Proctor, our last honorable mention. But jumping into the top five, we're going to start off with Caleb Lomu at 5. I had him at 5 in my list. I think, we're kind of all towards like the lower half of our rankings. None of us had him too high. I have seen a couple of people having him a little bit higher because I think people are impressed with just how technically sound his footwork is. 0 sacks allowed in 2025, which is obviously very impressive. I know Utah isn't the most throw the ball and kind of they're more into the run game, but their quarterback isn't great, so I think it's kind of impressive that they were able to he's able to hold it down and allow 0 sacks. But 6'6", 304, he's got a bit of a smaller frame, and I think that does show up at sometimes, right? Because, like I mentioned, he's got great footwork. I think he has great technique overall, right? He's got really solid base. He's got good bend. He does a good job of hand fighting to maintain control. That's kind of something that you don't see out of a lot of young prospects, that, kind of elite ability to kind of continue to move the hands, right? They get a little bit lazy with it. But I think, for him, right, with a smaller frame, like bigger guys are going to be able to get underneath him. I think he kind of has the opposite of Kadyn Proctor, right, where he's a guy that needs to gain weight, and so does his other teammate on the other side. We'll talk about Fano a little bit later, but and I don't think he has the most elite. I think with size, obviously, there's a bit of an issue, but I don't think he has the most elite lateral quickness and speed at the same time. I think, sometimes he has the inability because he has almost a bit of a quicker, kick step. He's not getting too deep into a drop. I think it's great and I think it's sound, but I think sometimes guys can kind of work right by him because he's not dropping back far enough and doesn't have the lateral quickness to kind of make up for that lost ground against quicker guys. So, and sometimes I just think that he could play a little bit too much over his toes. I think he relies on his upper body strength, his arms to kind of latch onto guys, and you kind of see that out of smaller guys. They want to get hands on you so that you can't get up underneath them or you can't run by them. Right? They are in control, but I think sometimes he can lean a little bit too much and kind of just get worked back when you're playing over your toes like that. So I think he's a good tackle. I think, it's rare in this class too. We don't have a ton of left tackles. A lot of these guys, Lomu, Miller, Fano, and Mauigoa are all right tackles. So he might be, outside of Freeling, the best left tackle in this class. And obviously, like I mentioned, he's very technically sound, but I think the frame leaves some to be desired, and the overall athleticness, because there are, a couple offensive linemen above this guy that are very, very athletic. And, one of those guys, we're going to get into him now, STERB breakdown, Mr. Blake Miller for us from Clemson. You're really high on him. I think we're all pretty high on him, but you were the highest on him by far. So what do you think about Blake Miller?
Yeah, I'll give my piece on Lomu here real quick. So Jenks had him at 4, and then me and you both had him at 5. Yeah, like you said, you kind of broke it down like very, very well. The first thing that jumps off the tape is like the elite hand fighting, and then super, super technical. I think he's really not as strong as I would have liked to see. Definitely can add that with the weight, but that's a question mark at the NFL level. Yeah, so I had him at 5. I had Blake Miller all the way up at 2. I just think like with him, he was given hard assignments like each week. Pass pro is just like super, super clean. What does he measure in at? He measures in at missing his measurements, but
6'6", 315.
Yeah. And I believe over 34-inch arms on this guy. So he has a 90.7 athleticism score, and that's just based off of measurements. We'll see how he performs at the combine. But this guy, like, he's just an absolute dampener of speed to power on the outside, and that was something that was like it was really stood out to me, and it's especially in this class where you see a lot of guys. I feel like losing the middle of the rep more often than they do the initial contact of the rep. For him, I think he just needs to get better in the run game a little bit. Like obviously the pass pro I just mentioned is really, really good. Like the vision and awareness on downfield blocks, like really isn't that great. And then another thing with him is that he probably just needs to improve his flexibility a little bit. He gets beat with, bendier types a little more often than you would like to see. But, I had a late first grade on him. and Jenks didn't rank him in his top 5. You had him at 4, and I ended up just having him at 2. There seems to be, not a whole lot of consensus outside of probably the top 1 or 2 guys in this class. But we'll get into a guy that I saw him similarly as. I didn't have him as 2 by a mile. So that's my breakdown, Blake.
Yeah, Blake, I like him too. I think, he's kind of being slept on a little bit in this whole pre-draft process because we're looking at, the Utah guys, Mauigoa, Freeling, but I mean, and Clemson's season just obviously didn't go as how they planned. But I think the biggest one for me was just a little bit of concern against Dylan Stewart. Dylan Stewart, you talked about the speed to bull a little bit. I think the speed to bull from Dylan Stewart got to him a little bit, right? He was able to get up into his chest and kind of driving back, but Dylan Stewart's going to be probably a top 5 pick in next year's draft. So he is an elite edge rusher. So, I mean, only 2 sacks allowed. I think he's a dog. And I think in the run game too, I think, he's not an absolute mauler like some of these guys, but I think he at least does a good job of sealing off, right? I think sealing off in the run game is so key, understanding angles, understanding where that back is, spatial awareness is key. But yeah, I'm a big fan of Blake Miller as well. But yeah, the other guy that you mentioned, we had at number 3, Monroe Freeling. And for me, I mean, 6'7", 315, playing in the SEC, obviously at Georgia, you're going against elite talent week in and week out. And, it's hard to hold that against some other guys, right? If they're not going against some of the most elite talent. But with Monroe Freeling, right, it's hard not to factor that in with him. But, I think he does a really good job in the run game of working to the second level. He's not an absolute mauler. I think he has the ability to maul, but anytime that you see tackles, not kind of, just stay with the status quo on the first level and ride out a tight end or whatever. If you're getting hands on multiple guys, right, and riding up, that's always a great thing to see in the run game because that's how big runs start to chunk. If you can get the linebackers, you can get the safeties. And get the big fellas on those guys. It's so hard. I've been as a linebacker, right? It's hard to fight, and I was a safety. It's hard to fight against massive offensive tackles. So, he's a short set guy, which I talked a little bit about with Caleb Lomu as well. Sometimes it's a fine line in your set, right? We'll knock you if you're setting over setting too much. If you're short setting too much and just attacking and you're getting beat with speed all the time, that's another concern. But for me, I don't think the short set is a problem with him because he wants to kind of gain control ASAP, right? He's a guy that wants to get his hands on you. He wants to dominate you. And he doesn't struggle with the speed with the short set, right? I think more often than not, he's able to work, kind of wash those guys down. He's got pretty good lateral quickness. As if you can be an offensive tackle that can both be aggressive in with your hands and getting hands on guys immediately, but also being able to fight the speed with being able to wash a guy down. That's some of the elite traits that some of the better offensive tackles in the NFL have. And this guy, right? I mentioned it before. He's one of the only premier left tackles in this class. Him and Caleb Lomu. And I guess Kadyn Proctor was one of our honorable mentions, but 2 out of our 5 guys are left tackles. The other 3 were all right tackles. So, protecting the blind side is huge. He reminds me a little bit of Tate Ratledge as well, another guy that I'm obviously comparing to his former teammate as who's a guard. But I think in this sense, it's more of a positive because Tate, I saw him as kind of a guy that was going under the radar, was just solid in all facets of the game. But was really strong in the run game and just, again, understood how to get to the second level, how to maul some of those linebackers. And I see that with Monroe Freeling. I think he holds his ground really well against some of the power guys. And like I said, maybe you would think he would be susceptible to some more of the speed rushers because of the short set, but he's able to wash those guys down really, really well. So, I mean, I love Monroe Freeling. And for me, yeah, he's the top left tackle in this class. What do you think about Monroe?
Yeah, I mean, it's like one of the first things that you mentioned is like they set him on an island a lot, and in the SEC, like that just speaks to how much trust they have in this guy. And like he's 315 right now, but honestly, if you look at him, it looks like he could even put on more muscle and more mass if he really needed to. I'm really high on this guy. It seems like he's kind of going like a bit under the radar, maybe like late 2, early 3 is what I've been seeing. But for me, I think he's like an early 2 grade minimum. So yeah.
Yeah, I would love him in the 20s. I mean, if you're a team, like I said, he's probably the top left tackle. If you're a team that's looking, to protect your quarterback's blind side, I mean, he's got to be a guy that you're looking at in the teens to the 20s because left tackle is a premier position. But next, we're going to move into our number 2 consensus guy, Spencer Fano, who I had at number 1 on my list. I think you and Jenks both had him at number 2, 6'6", 302.
I think I had him at 3. Yeah, because of Miller.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Yep.
And he was the guy I was mentioning. Like, I see him and Miller, obviously not as the same player, but like very, very similar.
Yeah. Yeah. I see Fano in a similar vein to the way I see Caleb Lomu too, as well. Similar build, obviously, same school, both went to Utah. Obviously that's amazing for Utah producing 2 of the top tier tackles in this class. But 6'6", 302, he's got a little bit of a smaller frame even than Caleb Lomu has. So it's a bit of concern. And honestly, like when I first turned on the film, like I was like, this guy kind of looks awkward in space. Like he doesn't really, bring a ton of the thump. But as I watched more and more of the film, I think that he's a guy that, he's kind of sneaky athletic, right? He doesn't look pretty, but he can move obviously with a slimmer frame. And I think he really uses that to his advantage in the run game, right? He's not going to bring the thump, but I think he's always in the right spot to seal guys. Like I mentioned before, right? Sealing is almost more effective than being able to do small guys. Because if you're able to seal, then work to another guy, right? That's how you score touchdowns on 70-yard runs versus getting just 20-yard runs by being able to maul some of those guys. I think he's got really strong hands. That's like I mentioned with Freeling. Like if you can really get on a guy and maintain your grip and maintain your control, I think that's obviously so key. And he almost, he's a guy with shorter arms. When I first turned on the film, I was like, this guy seems pretty long. Like I think he plays a little bit longer than some of the other guys with shorter arms, maybe because of his frame, right? He is a skinnier guy, but I think
I was going to say
because the frame definitely adds to it. But I think because he's so outwardly, physical with his upper body, because he knows that, again, smaller offensive tackles, they need to get their hands on you so that, you kind of can't get up within them. He doesn't play so much like over his toes, though. I think he does it in a very form way. I think because of the size, he's got really good lateral quickness, that it makes him able to kind of counter a lot of different moves. You didn't often see him, get beat on a second move, right? So whether that be speed, whether that be power, he had 0 sacks allowed all season. I will say in the Texas Tech game, there was probably one where David Bailey was about to get a sack and he held. So, that's maybe one. But this was the guy who was the only unanimous All-American out of this offensive tackle class. The other unanimous All-American on the offensive line being the Jones kid from Iowa. But, he's a tall guy that plays with pretty good bend. I think that he has room. It's easier for him to kind of, and I talked about Lomu, it's easier for him to gain some weight than it is for Proctor to lose some weight, I think. He can bulk up to maybe another 15 pounds, 10 pounds, get into that 315 range. And I think it won't lose him a ton of that lateral quickness, right? Because I think that's such a strong piece of his game that he needs to maintain. But I think adding to the frame definitely will help. But what do you think about Spencer Fano?
Yeah, that conversation that you just had about like whether it being like easier for Proctor to lose weight versus Fano to gain it. On tape, it seemed like let's just say it's 10 to 15 pounds for both of them. The 10 to 15 pounds wouldn't detract really anything from Fano's game. It only adds some things. So like I feel like Proctor gets like a little bit leany, and in the run game he's a mauler for sure, but like that 10 to 15 pounds, I don't know if he's getting like that much faster. I mean, you're still playing at like 350 or whatever. And he's listed at like 360, 365, but that's just what he's listed as. He might be more than that, dude.
He's a guy that's got to lose 40 to 50 pounds.
For sure. And to do that, I think he would have to almost completely change his play style or get developed quite a lot. Fano is pretty refined, pretty doesn't really need to get developed at all. It's just a matter of the strength thing and a frame thing. So I like him a lot. Not as much as other people. I have him, as like a late 1. great, and that's not according to this class. This class, I think, is a little weaker at offensive tackle. So you see him mocked in like the top 3, top 5. I've been seeing a lot of, which I don't know if I necessarily agree with, but a lot of those teams, it feels like they're going to have to talk themselves into this tackle class more than they are going to be, picking from a lot of players that they really like, and breaking the tie with an offensive tackle. But I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, one thing I want to add on Kadyn Proctor before we jump into our number one guy, and I kind of had this thought when I was thinking through him in this, watching film. He kind of reminds me of Mekhi Becton out of college. A
For
big
sure.
guy that needs to lose weight, and maybe if maybe he becomes a guard, and an elite guard in the way that Mekhi Becton has. What do you think about that?
I would definitely prefer him at guard, like at a tackle. I don't know if I would touch this guy with a 10-foot pole in the first round, if I'm being really honest. We've seen like huge tackles like come in, and it's honestly like uh, not that big of a track record. I think the only ones that I can think of are like the 2 Bengals guys, like Amarius Mims, Brown as well, or like the only guys that have stepped in and even been at like a serviceable level. Other than that, you look at like some other guys. It's a lot of guys you haven't really heard of playing at tackle, and they're drafted pretty late. But Proctor, obviously, like a big recruit. But other than that, it's just like he loses just way, way too much in pass pro for me to like feel comfortable with him out at tackle for me. So it's just I watched the Florida State game. I watched a couple of other games. I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but I watched that Florida State game first, and man, it's a tough watch. It's a real tough watch to have him, to be comfortable drafting him in the first round after that. So
Yeah, I mean, they lost that football game for a reason, and it was a huge upset.
yes.
But moving on into our number one guy, Francis Mauigoa from Miami. You had him at number one. Jenks had him at number one, and Jenks said by a wide margin. I had him at number two behind Spencer Fano. I see the hype though. You want to give us your thoughts on Francis Mauigoa?
Yeah. So when I initially did my grades for this, I try and scale it to an average draft class, not necessarily this draft class. So if I'm looking at all of these guys with like a JC Latham, Joe Alt last year, Will Campbell, I try and grade them according to all of the prospects that I can remember. I do think Maui Noah is the best prospect in this class by a pretty wide margin, although I don't have him graded that dissimilar from like Blake Miller and Spencer Fano. So I may need to do some adjusting there, move a couple of guys down. But to me, he's just super clean. I mean, this guy was like a 5-star prospect for a reason. Like great hand usage in pass pro, Mauler in the run game. He can get a bit leaning at times where like, he gets beat with like, I would say like power to speed more than he does speed to power. Cause like a guy, kind of like gets underneath him, out leverages him, especially in like the run game. He can kind of get like shed a bit easy if you kind of know what you're doing and he's leaning on you the entire game. But other than that, like the pass pro is just super, super good. Like hip sync. He's obviously like really, really strong, which it's a prerequisite for tackle at the NFL level. I think I would rather not develop guys because you don't know if that 10 to 15 pounds is going to be, strength, whether it's going to be bad weight, whether it's going to change your play style. We talked about that with Fano earlier. I think like him being such a technician that weight will really behoove him to add. But like Maui Noah already has that. Like he's already super polished to me. He's someone in this class I'd be pretty comfortable taking in the top 10, maybe not in like an average tackle class, but I've been seeing a lot of him get moved to guard, and I think it's just become like such a thing in these past few years to just like get super super transition to guard happy. I think Maui Noah can do it, no doubt, but I'm going to give my guys a chance to fail at tackle before I kick them into guard because if he works at tackle, then you don't have to pay for a tackle, and the guard market is much much lower in free agency than a tackle is. So Maui Noah I see as like a pretty solid prospect for like a round one caliber sort of a guy in a normal class, and in this class, I think that's good enough to make him stand alone.
Yeah, I'm kind of with, the whole guard hype on him just because obviously I think he's gonna come in with a little bit shorter arms. It seems like he's gonna be in the 33 range. It'll be less than the 34, kind of that's similar to where Will Campbell was. But with Campbell, the arms weren't a concern for me because I thought he was so, sound in a lot of different areas. And obviously he's got some growing to do in the NFL. But Mauigoa, I think two things kind of, for me were a knock on him that I saw. I think Fano has, again, with the weight, and that's kind of why I had him above because I think he's got the room to grow with the weight. Mauigoa, I think sometimes he tends to overset a little bit. He really kicks out, and I think that can, get him beat on the inside or anytime that I'm a defensive line coach in high school, and anytime that you see an offensive tackle that's really oversetting, you tend to set them up hard outside and then make an inside move. So you never want to give up the inside if you're one-on-one on an island out there at tackle. And oftentimes he is one-on-one on an island because they trust him because he is such a good offensive lineman. So you're not often, seeing guard help. And so the inside move is maybe a little bit more susceptible. That's a bit more scheme. But I think the bigger one for me, as far as it was technical, I don't think he has the strongest outside hand. I think so often, you see him fighting with that left hand and struggling to really move guys or stalemate guys when he brings the right hand in, or if he's, tasked to use the right hand. He just doesn't have like that strong, you sometimes you see offensive tackles where they come in and whatever side they may be on, but they're, obviously they're blocking with the inside hand, and then they come in with a strong punch on the inside hand. It's the same thing with the defensive line where, if you come out with a strong punch from the outside and kind of do that, hip throw move that Reggie White used to do. I think for him, that's my biggest concern because he doesn't have that strong punch where I can kind of see that with a guy like a Spencer Fano, and that's at 30 pounds lighter than Francis Mauigoa is. I think he could be I think the difference is, with him, he could be a good offensive tackle, and I see him as a good offensive tackle. These knocks are kind of being more, picky on different things. But I think that he can be an all-pro offensive guard. And I know that's what people said about Will Campbell, and that's kind of that's the trope now. But I think with him, it's really, really true because he is a tremendous offensive lineman, obviously at the collegiate level. But I think that some of those things that I mentioned maybe become more of a problem at the NFL level. Whereas if you're at guard, right, you have a lot of the protection and, you're not on the island where you need to maybe bring that strong outside punch or, worry about your set. So I liked him a lot, but I just think, I think Fano has more room to grow than he does. So, but overall, I mean, this is a weak offensive line class. So, if you're picking
how
out
old do you have Mauigoa?
20, he's 20 years old.
He's 20?
I think, or 20 or 21. He's a 3-year starter. He's played like 40 games.
I have him listed as 23 here, and then I looked it up, and I'm seeing 20 and 22. That's kind of a big deal, though. Yeah, I don't know.
Is he lying about his age?
I have no idea because I'm seeing 2003 and 2005 for his birthdays.
That is pretty crazy. I mean, if Francis Mauigoa's age, commented on this video, set us straight for when we get into mock drafts because, if he's 20 years old, yeah, you're definitely more willing to go after a guy like this. From what I heard when I was listening to some of the things, you watch some of the game tape and they talk about him. I'm pretty sure I heard them say that he was 20.
Okay.
He's I think he's been a starter since he was a freshman.
This most reputable database, it's James Foster's database, so I go based off of that most of the time. It says he's 20.9 here, so he should be turning 21 like right before draft night. I think that's correct, but then you look it up and it's like 22. I don't know. Anyways,
strange stuff. But Francis Mauigoa obviously going to be probably a top 5 pick in this upcoming draft. So, anyways, moving on to the interior offensive lineman class. Now that we've kind of worked our way through the honorable mentions and the top 5 for the offensive tackles, for our consensus top 5, starting at number 5, we had Connor Lew, the center from Auburn, the only center that you'll see on our consensus top 5 list. Then at number 4, we had Chase Bisontis, the guard from Texas A&M. Then at number 3, we had Keylan Rutledge, the guard from Georgia Tech. And number 2, Emmanuel Pregnon, the guard from Oregon. And then Vega Ioane, the guard from Penn State. But first, we're going to jump into some of our honorable mentions. STERB, your first honorable mention, Logan Jones. What do you think about him?
Yeah, so I wasn't able to find film on a lot of guys for this offensive line class, and it being weaker in my mind based on the the guys that I watched. I watched a couple of other guys that didn't quite make my list. I think Logan Jones was ranked 5th for me, considering centers and guards, but he's just like he's pretty solid. I saw him as like a late 3. He's not a guy that's gonna like be that great at the NFL level, but he said he was like more of like an athlete than anything. But like with the centers, I feel like Connor Lew, who we'll get into for a second, is like the only guy that I can project to be like a starter from day one. Logan Jones is more of like a gap filler for me, so not much to talk about with him.
Yeah, I got to watch a little bit of him when I was watching Jennings Dunker. I thought he was great in the run game. I think he's kind of a guy that just plays through the whistle, and you love to see that from a center, being a real gritty guy. But I just thought he was a little subpar in pass pro. I think he's a very athletic, effort-driven guy, and that helps him in the run game. But I think that lack of a strong base kind of shows up in pass pro in one-on-one situations where he just gets driven back a little bit. But Iowa's obviously a very, very weird offense where you're not asked to pass block too often. And you see that with Jennings Dunker as
He's
well.
He's also very old. He's like almost 25. So,
yeah. But he was the other consensus All-American on that offensive line list. So kudos to him for that. But anyways, getting into our next 2 honorable mentions, a guy that I had on my list and a guy that Jenks had on his list. First up, Jennings Dunker. And Jennings is, he was a offensive tackle in college at Iowa. He played a little bit of guard and even snapped a little bit at the Senior Bowl. For me, Jennings Dunker, I mean, maybe it's, again, the recency bias and trying to reach on comparisons, but I do see a little bit of that Gray Zableness in value for him, right? Because you can play this guy at multiple different positions on your offensive line. I think as an offensive tackle, he struggles a little bit more in the isolation game, being on the edge as a tackle because he's not the most athletic. So when it comes to pass pro, right, he's just not going to be able to slide and shift on different, counters and stuff like that. But I think at guard, you're able to isolate that a little bit more. He's an absolute mauler in the run game. I think he's truly amazing. He plays with so much effort. And you see that out of this Iowa team, right? Him and Logan Jones, both absolute maulers in the run game because they just play with such high intensity, high effort. But I think, this is a guy that he's probably going to go a little bit higher than maybe some of these other interior offensive linemen because he's showing that he has that capability to play at multiple different positions on the O-line, just like we saw Gray Zabel do. And you saw what that can do for an offensive line. The Seattle Seahawks offensive line was decent, but you plug a guy like Gray Zabel in there, and then you bring in his teammate at the center position, Jalen Sundell, and they were able to transform that offensive line pretty much overnight. So, listen, maybe you get Jennings Dunker, you play him at guard, and you get Logan Jones, you play him at center, and there's a lot of continuity there, and you make a Super Bowl run just like the Seattle Seahawks just did. But in reality, that probably is not going to happen. But our other honorable mention is Jalen Farmer, the guard out of Kentucky. Jenks had him towards his 5 to 6 range. I didn't have him in my top 5. He was an honorable mention for me. I think that he's a decent guard. I think he's probably a late day 2, early day 3 type of guy for me. I think he does a great job of working through stunts and as a combo blocker. And you want to see that from your interior guy because, more often than not, right, you're not being charged with, isolation blocks against one guy. You have a chip from a center, a tackle, a tight end, a back, whatever it may be. You're kind of sliding. So being able to read stunts and pass off different twists is key as a combo blocker. I think at sometimes, he had larger interior defensive linemen that were able to kind of work into him and beat him with power. I think it's because he doesn't quite attack a ton, like we talked about with some of those offensive tackles, right, where they're more attacking with their hands and more like, pressing where I think he was catching some guys. And I kind of saw this with Nature, the kid from Arizona State as well. It felt like he was catching a lot of guys too often. And you never want to see that from your offensive line because that leads to guys getting blown back into your quarterback. But I thought he did a pretty good job in the run game as well. I think he's a sealer. He's not quite a mauler. So he's not that like physical offensive guard. And I think for me, I think maybe Jenks saw some of that, the other more finesse pieces to his game. But I think for me as a guard, similar to the way that I loved Tate Ratledge last year, and if you guys watched the episode, I had Tate as the number one guard. I just love a guy that's an absolute mauler and plays physical and dirty and nasty as an offensive guard. So, anyways, that is our honorable mentions. Let's get into our top five now. STERB, you're going to break down our first guy at number 5, Connor Lew, the center from Auburn. What do you think about Mr. Lew?
Yeah, so Lou measures in at 6'3", 300 pounds, and he'll be under 21 on draft night, like maybe Mauigoa. We have to find out on that. But Connor Lew is a guy that they trusted early. He's coming off of an injury, which kind of sucks. I believe he tore his ACL like a third of the way through this year. But like he got a lot of early starts for Auburn, and that they trust a guy, at a young age to, call out mics, ID plays on the defense, call out protections. And that speaks a lot to, how much faith they have in him. For me, he has a strong upper half. He has quick feet. Like I just mentioned, he's young and he has a lot of starts under his belt. But his legs are a bit weaker. I'd like to see him, improve on that lower body strength a little bit. In pass pro, not the most important thing from your center, but it's definitely something you would love to see. He gets out leveraged kind of a bit, and I'd like to see a little bit more, finish and a little more pop in him from the run game. He's pretty good at, being a cerebral player, knowing where to be at the right time, especially when he's pulling. But in pass pro too, he's good at picking up protections, picking up loopers, stunts, whatnot. But again, that finish in the run game and that, the ability to, get leveraged a bit less in pass pro is something that I'd like to see. But overall, I think he's a pretty solid center prospect. I have like a late 2, early 3 grade on him.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of these centers don't have the biggest, kind of a wide frame. Think about a Creed Humphrey, a Jason Kelsey, right? Those are a little bit of wider guys. These guys, 6'3", 300, that's a bit of that slimmer frame. We talk about that with the tackles, the slimmer frame. I think, though, of all the centers, he probably picks up the best in 1v1 pass pro. He holds his ground better than a lot of the other guys. I mean, I watched Jake Slaughter and Ruben Bain had him whiffing, head over heels on him. So, I mean, I like this guy. I had him at 5 as well. I think, the big thing for me with him was just very smart player. Reads stunts very well, like you said, understands when to climb, a lot of times, again, seeing guys get multiple hands on guys, right, and knowing when to pass off and continue to move to the next level is so key, especially from these interior offensive linemen. But moving into number 4 on our list is Chase Bisontis. I believe Jenks had him at 5 or 4. Yeah, I think he had him at 4. I had Bisontis at number 3. I don't believe you had Bisontis on your list.
So Jenks had him at 6 and I had him at 4.
Okay, yeah, mixing it up. So Jenks had him at 6, you had him at 4, I had him at 3. Chase Bisontis, to me, I mean, I think in pass pro, the first couple clips that I watch, I mean, this is a guy, I think the first 3 clips that I watch, he did that classic offensive line rip move where he wants to, rip you down and pancake you immediately. He's a guy that wants to just bully you in pass pro. I mean, a lot of times I saw him kind of just work guys almost out of the screen in pass protection. It was amazing to watch this guy. And that's what I think I love so much about him. It's just the aggressiveness as a guard. It's so key, right? You have the ability, you're not being tasked to be, like I said, isolated in one-on-one situations. But when you are, if you can absolutely just erase someone off the screen, that is obviously huge. I think his aggressiveness can hurt him a little bit sometimes. He's so forward on guys, but, guys are able to beat him with speed. But I think he can match that with pretty decent lateral recovery speed as well. So he's not often, being overly aggressive and then getting beat, off that second move. He's more often than not being able to recover off of that, first loss. So I think some bigger guys, have the ability to work him back a little bit, but he's got really good active hands and active feet where he maintains leverage. And like I mentioned earlier, right, it's rare to see guys with such active hands at the collegiate level. That's more of a thing that guys develop as pros, of just resetting, right, and kind of getting back into a good leverage instead of just trying to fight a battle you pretty much already lost, right? Reposition yourself and get back underneath the guy so that you're not getting just worked back. So I think, he's not the perfect prospect. I had him at 3 because I just thought that he was more of a clean guard. That I had Dunker at 5, Pregnon at 4, so I had him right above them. I thought he was just a bit of a more clean guard than Dunker. Obviously, Dunker has to do that transition of moving to inside, and we'll see how that goes. I think it'll go well. But with Pregnon, I think he's just a little bit more aggressive than Pregnon. But what did you think about Chase Bisontis, the guard out of Texas A&M?
Yeah, I really liked him a lot too. I kind of see him exactly how you said. The recoverability is the only thing I'll push back on a little bit. Like at times, the ability to recover is like, you're doing this against college level guys, but his ability to like reset and not actually get beat on like a rep where he's in danger of getting beaten, I didn't think stood out to me as this is something that's going to translate to the NFL level. It's more like a bit concerning that he's doing this against college level guys. Obviously high level of competition there, but a lot of his near losses seem to be just that, and not like translating more to an ability to recover that I would think is going to hold up at the NFL level. But then like the hand fighting as well, I don't think he's super refined as a hand fighter, but his lower half is just so strong to me. That's something that really stood out, is that he can pretty much do whatever he wants with his hands, because his lower half is just so stout that he's not going to lose. He's not going to lose leverage based off of that. So I had him pretty similar to you. I had him as like a late 2, early 3, very similar to Connor Liu in terms of grading. So yeah.
Yeah, you at least love to see the hands, though, right? Because, like I mentioned, that's
Right.
something that you don't often see guys start to develop.
You can
So
teach
if
it as
you,
well.
yes, and it's easier to refine it than teach it, I think, and work it into a
Sure.
guy that's not already doing that. It's hard to rewire the brain so many times. But at number 3 in our consensus list was Keylan Rutledge. This is a guy that Jenks is actually really, really high on. He has him at 3. I had him at 3, but Jenks has him. He's high on him because he wants him to be a New Orleans Saint. Where did you have Keylan Rutledge as well?
I had Keylan Rutledge as my honorable mention at 6.
It's your honorable mention, yeah. So you're not going to love that Jenks wants this guy in the New Orleans Saints, maybe, but
It's
yeah,
fine, but I'll let you give your spiel.
Yeah, I think Keylan Rutledge for me was kind of the I saw him in a similar way that I saw Bisontis, but I saw this guy as more of a beat you up in the run game more than in the pass game. I love offensive guards that are maulers in the run game, and I thought more often than not he was looking to take someone's head off in the run game, which is that kind of intensity, that kind of energy that you bring to an offense that changes your run game entirely. You need to have someone that's just not dirty in not playing the game the way that it should, but their mindset. Think about just a dirty, smelly offensive lineman like a Mark Schlereth that just wants to run you over and probably pees his pants while he's at it. So I think in pass pro though, I think he's able to stalemate guys, decently well in 1v1 pass pro because he is such a strong guy. Like I think that comes out in the run game. It's attitude, but it's also the pure play strength, and I think that shows up a little bit in pass pro. And I think that he has decent lateral recovery speed against some of the quicker rushers. So I like the guy. I didn't really have too much of a knock on him. I don't think that I think the run game is more of his strength than in the pass game. But I think guards, I'm never too concerned if they're not like the best in pass pro, right? Because again, like I mentioned, you can hide guards on the interior. You can give them help. You can slide with them. You can chip with them, but you cannot teach someone how to be nasty in the run game. And I think if you can establish the run, you can worry about where you're going to help your guard in pass pro. So 6'3", 316 too. He's got a decent frame as well. But what did you think about Keylan Rutledge, the guard out of Georgia Tech?
Yeah, I think he was really good in the run game, like you mentioned. The pass pro, I think it was maybe a bit more concerning. Like you said, it's not the premier trait that you're seeking out in a guard because you can hide them. But his hands, I thought, were pretty poor in the pass game. And then, honestly, I could have just been catching him on some bad games or whatever. But he seems to like not not want to finish through the whistle, which is something that was pretty concerning to me. Like uh, I caught like 4 or 5 snaps or 4 or 5 reps in one game where I think he won on 2 and then lost on 2, but then he would just, kind of start walking. And I realize these are big guys, he's your offensive lineman, but he was like the only prospect that I really saw that with in this class of the guys that I watched. So that was something that was a little concerning to me, but he's obviously like super, super strong, super, super stout, very good in the run game. So
Yeah, I'll add this. Maybe he was a little tired because Georgia Tech is actually on offense quite a bit. They run the football a crap ton. And their defense isn't phenomenal. So they're out there a lot. But
yeah,
yeah, that's interesting. You never want to see your offensive linemen kind of lollygagging, no excuses, obviously, whether they're out there a ton on offense or not. But anywho, I think that, you know, I think the run game is huge, but yeah, the pass game, I definitely agree. I think there's some things that he could definitely improve on. But moving on into our number 2 consensus prospect, Emmanuel Pregnon, the guard out of Oregon. STERB, you had him at number 2. Jenks had him at number 2. I had him all the way back at number 4, and no, that's not because I'm a USC fan and I'm a hater that he transferred to Oregon. We'll talk about it in a minute, but what were your thoughts on Pregnon as the guard out of Oregon?
I just got to say real quick, I can hear the Notebook, and we got to get a shout out to Ty for that, bringing old school with the Notebook today. I'm a
That
data science
notebook and
guy,
making
so
notes,
I got Google
you
Sheets
know.
pulled up, but it's a different
Old
breed
school,
out here for Ty.
taking notes back in college and film. I said today, last year I did the Google Sheets, and this year I was like, we're gonna get old school, we're gonna get down and dirty, and we're gonna write some notes today.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, not for me. With Pregnon, I'm very, very interested to see what you had to say. Offensive line scouting isn't really, my strongest suit. I would say as like an analyst or whatever you want to call what we do here. To me, he didn't really have a lot of cons. I think he was pretty well rounded. Mauler in the run game, great zone blocker. Like the ability to sustain blocks from him, I thought was really, really good. Like you don't see guys really shed off of him that often. Good against stunts, not the greatest in pass pro, but again, that's not really what we're looking for in a guard here. But like as a guy who can, I think he's pretty good on the move as well. I want to see what he weighed in at. Yeah, so he weighs in at 320, and he has almost 34-inch arms. So like the frame is obviously there, and I'm interested to see what like his 10-yard split is at the combine because I think like in his own scheme or whether you're pulling behind this guy, he can get out on the move pretty well. So I don't know. I didn't really see a lot of holes in his game. I'm curious to see what like Jenks has or what Jenks has to say about him for a synopsis. But what did you see as like the weaknesses for Pregnon?
Yeah, I think that he is really good in pass pro as far as like passing off stunts and as a combo blocker. I just didn't think he was tasked with a lot of one-on-one blocking situations, and I think
Yeah,
some of that
I see that.
is just scheme at Oregon, but that's fine, right? Because that's more translatable, I think, to the NFL level with what you're asking out of your guards sometimes. But the run game piece, I think he's good in the run game. I just don't see the nasty mentality out of Pregnon. And that's dating all the way back to the USC days. And obviously, players can evolve as a prospect, but having watched him, for I think he was a starter for a year at USC, he's a big, strong guy. Like he kind of came out, there was you know, a meme of him, not even a meme, but just like the growth that USC did some growth pictures and like from year to year, and he was just absolutely shredded the next year. But I never saw him as just kind of one of those nasty guys. I saw him as this is a guy that is solid in all areas, but again, he's just nothing. Like I need something as a guard that like stands out for me, right? And I think Tate Ratledge last year stood out to me as like such a smart player and an aggressive player. Some of the other guys that I had above him, I think they just stood out as a little bit more aggressive as guards, and I think that he just didn't pop like that for me. And I think that not being challenged with a lot of one-on-one situations, it's harder to evaluate a guy like that. At least with Bisontis and with Rutledge, I was able to see that. I was able to see them, sometimes be able to stalemate guys, sometimes you lose guys, and you say, okay, we can trust him sometimes, but depending against the front that we get or the player that we're playing up against, but maybe we need to help him every now and then. With Pregnon, and again, it could just be being too picky with it, but it's harder to evaluate a prospect when you don't see those types of things. The other thing with him, I think sometimes he's a little reachy. I think, he plays a little bit too much over the toes because he is a very strong guy and he wants to get his hands on you. And that's awesome, right? As I mentioned, if you can gain control sooner the better. But I think a little bit too much over the toes that, yields you to getting, kind of guys get up into you and just kind of run you by because you have no balance, you have no strong base. So he's a good guy to me. I think that he, a second round pick, if you took him in the second round, I think that's a quality pick. But I just think there was nothing that was like, this is a guy that stands out to me.
Okay. Yeah. I see. I kind of see exactly what you're saying. And again, the one-on-one reps, that is something that, looking back on it now, that like, he didn't get a lot of those reps. And my only con for him was that, he gets lean happy at times and, plays over his toes rather than within his frame. I had him graded as like a late 1. I should say my grades are accounting for everything except positional value. So I'd be pretty comfortable taking him late first or, probably into the early or the late 30s, early 40s. That's good to hear.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see kind of how our evaluation of some of these guys changes as we get close to the combine too, because offensive line rankings not quite often adjusted by some of the combine stuff, but I think with some of these groups with the arm lengths and some of the 5'10" 5s, seeing guys lateral quickness, that could definitely change maybe value. Maybe Pregnon, I think he could do really well in some of the 5'10" 5 stuff because I think he's a good athlete. So maybe he would rise up my board a little bit if some of the other guys moved a little bit slower, but. Moving into our number 1 guy, Vega Ioane from Penn State. I probably butchered his name. You'll probably say it better than me. But STERB, you had him at 1, I believe. Jenks had him at 1, and I had him at 1. So clearing away the best offensive guard in this class. What did you think about Ioane?
Yeah, so I'll try it the full name here. I think it's Olaivavega Ioane. That could be incorrect. But just like to sum this guy up, he's like just super, super well-rounded. And like the 3 words that like stick out to me, when watching his tape and looking at his profile is like frame, leverage, and then like translatability. Like he doesn't really have a lot of nits that you can pick at him as a prospect. He just like plays so well. He's obviously incredibly strong. He plays well, hip sync. He doesn't beat a lot of guys in ways that are, ways that you're not going to see at an NFL level. Like it's not like elite hand fighting in any sort of way. It's not, he's, picking up on stunts and chipping guys or whatever, or not chipping guys, but catching people off guard. He's like downhill running at you, drives you off the ball. And he's not the fastest guy in space is like the only really knock I have on him, but like, he's just going to run you over. And to me, it's like in this class, it's really interesting because I see him as a guard prospect that it's going to be really hard for him to fail at the NFL level. And it all just comes down to, positional value. I don't see this draft as like a very good one per se. So could this guy, move up into, the mid-teens like we saw Gray Zabel at guard last year do? Could he perhaps move a little bit up from there? Could he, perhaps go like 21 or 22 to the Chargers? They're picking somewhere around there. It seems like for now he's penciled into that Charger spot because he's, very reliable. Going to be pretty hard for him to fail, in my opinion. But it's a matter of, whether someone sees this prospect that I think is going to be hard to beat in terms of reliability and values that over positional value and taking a guy with more question marks, let's say at offensive tackle or some other premium position.
Yeah, this is a top 15 guy for me. I mean, he was almost as perfect as an offensive line prospect can get. And like you said, right? I think my one knock was maybe he's not the most athletic in space, but he plays with so much power. He's got pretty good, lateral movement. Like it's not a concern for me in the run game because I think he's such a smart player too. And he's a guy that I saw more often than not, kind of get into one-on-one pass pro situations and just absolutely, just stunt guys. Like there's no movement. He's not getting work back. And this is in an offense at Penn State where they quite frankly were a bad offense. He was kind of the one bright spot on this team almost entirely. He's going to probably be the top guy picked from Penn State. And after that, I mean, a lot of these other guys that were maybe once viewed as top prospects from Penn State have kind of fallen off. And this is kind of a guy that has gone trending in the opposite direction. So yeah, I love him. I think that I'm almost willing to say that he's probably a better prospect than Gray Zabel was. And Gray went at what, like 13, I think, maybe. So I think
might have been 16 because
it
they
might have been.
were 9-8 and missed the playoffs, 10-7 missed the playoffs.
Yeah, and obviously, offensive line, guard, like you said, it is such a positional value. What do you need? Are you a team that was maybe on the brink of being in the playoffs and you don't need any of those premier skill positions, but can add a guard that would kind of change your entire offense? So I think that this is a guy that can be that. You got where Gray went?
18th.
18th.
I knew it was an even number.
I think that I think he can go higher than that. I think it would be, it would be a good fit for some of those teams. Obviously, at some point, we'll get into a little bit more of a mock draft right before the draft. But any closing thoughts on the offensive line? Obviously, we covered all of our offensive tackles and all of our interior offensive linemen. If we missed anyone, make sure you comment on the video. Any guys that you think maybe we should target going into our mock draft eventually. But STERB, any closing thoughts on the offensive line?
Yeah, I'm very curious to see where a lot of the tackle prospects are talked about in terms of like draft buzz and whatnot, because they're all a bit different. I think Mauigoa is probably going to be a bit exhausted as a prospect because, like you said, I think he can move into guard, but I think he's going to be a pretty good tackle. I think when we're grasping at straws with the top tackle in the class, in my opinion, that could be a pretty drawn out narrative, especially getting closer and closer to the draft. But then like at guard, it's just really Ioane is as good as it gets in this class for sure. And then Pregnon, and then besides that, I don't think the interior offensive line class is very great. But that wraps up this one for me. So.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It'll be interesting to see where some of these guys fall because it is viewed as a weaker offensive line class, but because of the how important offensive line is, do we see 4 or 5 guys go in the first round? Talks about just how this class as a whole and this free agency class is weaker as a whole. So maybe some of those teams fill up needs in the trade market, and some of these guys fall out of the first round. But anyways, that'll do it for our offensive line breakdown for this week. Next week, we're going to get into our defensive line. I believe just interior defensive linemen. Won't get to edge until later on because that is kind of a premier position. But we'll break it down our interior defensive linemen. I think the combine is starting here soon as well. I think in a couple weeks. So looking forward to all that. But thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of us breaking down the offensive line. And like I said, make sure you keep an eye out for next week's episode. Like, comment, and subscribe. And thank you guys for tuning in.